Well, the day is almost upon us. We're coming to the end of a long drought for Warhammer 40k Darktide, and the light is at the end of the tunnel. There's a lot to be excited for, and perhaps for some of you, enough to get you playing again. It's been a while. On October 4th, Darktide is effectively undergoing a soft relaunch of the game alongside the release of the Xbox version, and with it, there will be a massive class overhaul for every character currently in the game, completely reworked skill trees, new abilities, equipment, and talents, and likely a bunch of weapon overhauling and rebalancing as well. If it's anything like Vermintide 2, with the imminent release of the console version of the game, that means content like weapons, new maps, classes, and additional patches will begin flowing much more freely on PC after that date, which can only be good news if you're a fan of the series. But of course, there's an additional layer of red tape to navigate this time around because of parity requirements between the two versions. Crossplay wasn't a thing for Vermintide, and console certification was less relevant there for PC players because the patches didn't need to go live together. In fact, they were usually weeks or months later on console compared to Steam. But I believe they will be updated in concert now for Darktide, because if crossplay is gonna work, it has to be, obviously, and my understanding from other games is that Steam allows developers to push patches basically whenever they want to, while Microsoft requires more hoops for devs to jump through, and the turnaround time is usually longer. So that might be a little hiccup on that front. Remains to be seen how that will affect things on the PC side, but certainly something to keep in mind. What we're gonna do today, in preparation for the storm of gameplay showcases that will begin soon TM, we're gonna give a basic overview of the changes coming and what to expect when it comes to these new talent trees and class overhauls. And there is a lot of information, so I'm gonna try to condense it. And that basically means we're talking about equipment, abilities, what they'll be able to wield with their new subclasses, and how they'll each be able to build into specific specializations. Because we're upgrading from what was 18 unique nodes per character tree to like 70 plus. I mean, we're getting way bigger on the talent tree side. That means a lot more options for players, and it's not even counting the little connecting nodes that modify toughness or health or range damage, that sort of thing. Character building and customization is about to get a lot more fun and varied, which is really cool. But, and I can't stress this enough, going off the blog post and elements they've hinted at, most of what we know about Darktide is about to change dramatically. Because while the standard kit for each of these characters will remain the same at level 1, and they'll play how you remember, even the OG stuff, like Preacher with his charge, Psyker with his brain burst and scream, Veteran with its sharpshooting ult, and Ogryn with its bull rush, all of those abilities are being buffed and changed as well, which means new breakpoints, new approaches to combat, and presumably an overhaul of enemy health and balance on that front as well. So, alright, enough of that, let's jump into the nitty-gritty. What exactly is changing? Number 1, each character class will now have 3 separate subclass avenues they can pursue. For the Veteran, Sharpshooter is very much still a thing, but Squad Leader and Commando will be 2 separate playstyles they can also go after. Same for the Ogryn, where Skullbreaker is still that bruising charger we all know and love, but Gunlugger and Bulgrin, or Bulwark, will be joining him on the tree. Keep in mind, the cool thing with this system is that you don't have to go all in with Sharpshooter or Commando, Bulwark, or Skullbreaker. You can mix and match it. You can take crack grenades with a traditional sniping lasgun approach, or you can get smoke grenades as you roleplay a close-range Commissar. As we said, those base combat abilities for the base subclasses are still there, but once you reach them on the skill tree, which will probably be around 5 or 10 skill points in, they're going to be an augmented version. And in the case of Executioner's Stance, the Sharpshooter ult for Veteran, you're getting way better shooting, range damage, and multiple opportunities to extend the duration of your ult, even in comparison to the old version. Voice of Command will be the Squad Leader's ultimate ability, punishing toughness for friends and staggering all nearby enemies, much like Victor Saltzpyre's Witch Hunter career skill. Essentially that bastion in the middle of combat, staying in the middle of everything. If shit starts to hit the fan, you create space, you support your allies, and you get them ready for more fighting. And Infiltrate, for the more selfish, sneaky players, will allow you to enter stealth for 6 seconds, gaining more move speed and toughness, while suppressing enemies upon breaking invis. Super useful for peeling off your group and going to deal with a sniper or another high-value target in the back, to get repositioned on the flanks, or simply escape when your stamina is broken and your squishy ass is about to get taken to Pound Town by a Crusher and 15 Maulers. In terms of blitz abilities, the Shredder frag applies more bleed and damage than the default frag grenade. The smoke grenade will block shooters' lines of sight and force them to reposition, and crack grenades in particular are one of the elements I'm most excited to try out because they are a single target nade that sticks to flak, carapace, and unyielding enemies and can presumably outright kill stuff like Crushers or Bulwarks in a single blast, perhaps even through a Bulwark shield, which when combined with grenade regen talents should make for some incredibly fun gameplay in high intensity missions, particularly those with lots of maulers and heavy armor. The idea of throwing a crack grenade and sticking it to the face of a Crusher, then watching it just explode and die in one hit sounds absolutely, positively glorious. Smoke grenades are another really interesting choice though. We know the danger that groups of shooters can pose against at least an uncoordinated team, one that isn't communicating very well or closing them down effectively, but smokes can help mitigate those issues to an extent, making those open hallways safer to cross and suppressing enemy fire so your Ogryns and Zealots can move into melee. 10-second duration does sound a little bit on the short side to me, but I imagine a lot of those numbers will be easily tweaked in the coming days and weeks, and for many of these numbers, perhaps they already have. Now, the interesting thing about Veteran is that while every other class in the game will have keystones on top of these new combat abilities and equipment, keystones being essentially gameplay-defining traits near the end of each tree, signified by the purple areas, the Veteran does not have any keystones, and I find the reasoning quite interesting, and I'll read this verbatim. Initial designs for the Veteran talent tree included weapon-specific keystones, with the Plasma Rifle, Bolter, and Power Sword as the first set. The idea was to create specific bonuses for different playstyles while keeping them mutually exclusive. But after closed testing and multiple reworks, these weapon-specific keystones were removed because they either offset the entire balance of the particular weapon or became a mandatory talent tax, neither of which were impressively interesting. Basically think of stuff like heat damage on Plasma or Power Cycler being mandatory on the Power Sword. Those are traits that are tied to those weapons, and getting more energized hits is great, right? But if it's an option, it's your only option for Power Sword, and that's just not very fun or interesting because there's no choice there. You have to take it. If the idea for a Plasma weapon was, okay, I'm gonna take a talent so now I don't burn my health away and it's only gonna affect my toughness, that's not really a choice. A keystone for a character should never be, I have to take this to make my weapon function. So I'm glad they moved away from that for Veteran, and what I'm hoping is it allows for more choices and mix and matching on the Vet tree, where the Vet's more of a jack of all trades, but some of the other subclasses for the other characters might tend to build more specialized. Again though, if you want to go hyper specialized on the Vet tree, it looks like that will be an option here. Now, for the Zealot, the builds and strats are getting even more interesting. We don't know exactly what the subclasses are yet, but while Preacher still exists, there's going to be a stealthy assassin archetype now, and one centered around prayer, faith, and supporting allies. The Death Cult assassin type character leans into that Shade gameplay pretty heavily, going for backstabs, able to quick throw knives while wielding any other weapon, a stealth, invisibility, and coherency buffs when playing isolated and away from your team while not technically being in coherency, which I'm sure couldn't possibly have any negative ramifications in pubs, right? Certainly not going to be anything like elf gameplay in V2, no, surely not. Clearly going to be a great way to reset that situation if shit's hitting the proverbial fan, if you're surrounded, if your teammates are going down left and right. Clearly going to be a great clutch, speed run, and res type tool. And from what we know, it will also be incredible for stuff like killing bosses on the Thunderhammer, right? Basically enter Shroud Field, walk behind a Plague Ogryn, charge up thrust for 2 or 3 seconds, then let her rip with 100% backstab damage, finesse damage, and crit chance. Any boss in the game whatsoever is just gonna disappear if you do that correctly with the current numerical values. Maybe they're going to be buffing boss health as well. I do think some of the bosses in the game are a bit underwhelming and easy to kill at the moment. Chaos Spawn, I think, is in a good spot, but Plague Ogryn and Beast of Nurgle can be a bit pathetic sometimes. Maybe they'll get more health to compensate, don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about 2 invisibilities, one for Zealot, one for Veteran. Particularly for the Zealot, it's not exactly the most thematic thing in the world, but then again, if they really are leaning into that death cult assassin type vibe, then perhaps it shouldn't be like the other Zealots and really should have its own design space and niche, which it sounds like it does with the current design. It's just not the most creative when we've seen it in both Vermintide and Darktide before. Throwing knives sound awesome though. The class that super interests me here is the Chanting Support Zealot. We don't have a name for it yet, don't know what I'd call it. Maybe it's taking the place of the current Preacher, because it will be preaching, but with the Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude ability, you'll wield a holy relic that pulses with energy, granting allies stun immunity and invulnerability for the duration. Each pulse will regen their toughness dramatically, knocking back enemies and staggering bosses. So you can run into the middle of a room, raise your hand and raise this relic, and it'll glow with holy power. You'll start praying to the divine light of Abdaddy, and everything nearby will cower in fear while your allies get overshields and are reinvigorated for combat. Sounds like a potentially game-changing ult that should end up looking sick and super thematic as well. In terms of equipment, the Sunstorm Grenade has 50% more radius than default. The Immolation Grenade will burn unarmored enemies to cinder and deny an area for the duration. Sounds very thematic as well, throwing holy fire into the middle of the pyre and burning away the Darktide. And Blades of Faith are consecrated knives that deal high damage, perfect for taking out ambient bruisers and the occasional gunner, being able to quick swap into them. So some interesting design spaces there, from an invis loner assassin type archetype to a holy priest that salvages bad situations by chanting in the face of the Darktide. It's kind of the original Zealot archetype that I was expecting before launch, so I cannot wait to see that particular one brought to life. Now, Psyker is next, and this is where the design team seems to really be popping off, because some of these new additions sound absolutely insane, and there are so many more tools now. There's going to be a massive overhaul to how Psyker plays. Lots of new powers incoming. Brain Burst is still around, as is the Venting Shriek ult to purge your peril, and its upgraded version Brain Rupture now deals 50% more damage, which will change a ton of breakpoints for Psyker, depending of course on enemy health changes as well. Don't know those values yet, but I believe if we were to take it on live, it would take 2 Brain Bursts to kill a Crusher instead of 3 with this change, so that's already a pretty big deal. But it will be joined by the Smite Blitz, which is quite literally Palpatine lightning from your hands, replacing Surge Staff, and Telekine knives called Assail, which are warp-infused homing missiles that self-regen, track targets, and help you deal with hordes and ambient enemies. So when I say replacing Surge Staff, I don't mean that weapon's being deleted or anything. What I imagine is happening here is that Smite Lightning will fill the same role, based on the blog, the details we had therein, of stun-locking enemies and holding them in place as a crowd control option, while Surge will possibly get a rework. Whether that will make it a more DPS-oriented weapon, whether it'll have less targets, more targets, just completely change the design of it. I have no idea what they have planned on that particular front, but hopefully Fat Shark gives it another unique niche so the two don't end up being redundant. But I will say, Double Lightning does sound like it could be a hell of a lot of fun. Use the Surge, use Smite, Palpatine your way through any map in the game. That sounds awesome. Knives though, the knives sound crazy. You're in melee or you're shooting stuff, then all of a sudden you can quick swap to homing projectiles that instantly headshot a high value threat or delete crowds of ambient bruisers that are rushing in. Sounds super useful when you combine that with the new Telekine Shield ult, which drops down a massive wall that blocks bullets but lets your teammates shoot through. There are so many options to weave in and out alongside the standard melee and range gameplay loop of the Tide series. I can throw a bunch of knives, swap to my staff and explode a horde, drop a wall to protect my team, then charge into melee with a Force Sword and take the head off a Chaos Ogryn, and you can weave all of those things in together. Psyker was already really high skill cap, but good Psyker gameplay now is just going to be straight up beautiful to watch. So many active abilities, so many cooldowns, so many ways to alternate between your tools. I think it's going to be super fun to play and to watch on YouTube. And you can customize the wall even further, turning it into a dome with 360-degree coverage or stunning melee enemies who charge through it, get multiple walls for more uptime and protection in front. So a lot of ways to customize that wall too. I'm not going to go into the keystones too much yet. I'll have the opportunity to do that very soon, but on paper they look very interesting, massively empowering the peril generation, crit chance, weak spot damage, and cast time of your abilities. Psyker in particular, gonna feel like a whole new character with all these new options. And finally, we have the Ogryn. Now, unlike Psyker and Zealot, we already know what the 3 subclasses for Ogryn are, what they'll be called. Skullbreaker is the baseline charger, while Gunlugger is the new range DPS option, and Bulwark, or Bulgrin, is that Ironbreaker of Darktide, essentially. The Bodyguard's role is designed around drawing aggro, much like Gromril played at Barden from V2. Jumps into the middle of a horde, taunts everything with his slab shield, forces them to attack him, forces them to blob up, which makes grenades and AoE abilities, wave clear, all those things more effective for your team. And speaking of AoE, Ogryn has some hilarious options on that front now. There is an Ogryn-sized frag bomb, like quadruple the size of a normal frag, that will function like a mini nuke, exploding everything in a 50-foot radius and clearing the entire screen. Perfect for those panic moments where your team's about to get overwhelmed. Bombs Away has returned in a more powerful form. You're still throwing that box of grenades. It'll detonate if it hits any enemy now, not just Carapace or Flak. And with 2 additional grenades for a bigger boom in it, 6 instead of 4, it'll be even more impactful now. And then there's the Big Friendly Rock, a big old slab of stone that can one-shot most things up to Bulwarks or Crushers. So it sounds like it won't be very effective versus Carapace, probably will not go through Bulwark shields, but if you're, say, a Trapper ambushing from behind, well, the Ogryn's gonna turn around and smack that pervert in the face with a boulder that regens every 60 seconds. As you can imagine, getting nailed in the face by a brick the size of a football will cause a lot of pain amongst the Mobian 6th, and a lot of hilarious content for YouTube videos as well. Montage moments imminent. The Gunlugger, on the other hand, is the shooty Ogryn we've all been waiting for. And while there hasn't been any news on new weapons as of yet, and that is a little bit disappointing, I was certainly hoping to see some. They haven't talked about any yet. Maybe they're holding on to them. Maybe there will be new patches coming in the coming days, weeks, months, whatever, that new weapons actually get added. But this is where I imagine the Reaper autocannon, the Heavy Bolter, the Las Cannon, those types of things will eventually make their appearance on Gunlugger. For now, Gunlugger will be the domain of the Ripper Guns and the Heavy Stubbers, where they're really going to shine and where the kill feeds will presumably flow like wine. Point Blank Barrage is your ult ability, instantly swapping to and reloading your ranged weapon to full, granting 25% extra fire rate, massive reload speed increase, and additional DPS options like Rending and Incendiary, if the customization node artwork is to be believed. If you look at that closely, on the right side of the tree, one has a picture of a bullet passing through armor, the other shows Poxwalkers on fire, so I imagine that has something to do with AP properties and setting things on fire when you shoot, which should be pretty fun. And on the other side of the tree, you've got your Bruiser with heavy melee damage and rushdown potential in CQC. In the middle, you've got Bulwark that takes aggro and helps your team. And the right side is pure range DPS, buffing the Gorgonums and Rumblers for juicy suppressive fire and those big kill feeds. And my takeaway from all of that is just kind of like, wow, that's a lot of stuff right there. The build possibilities, the ability to mix and match equipment and keystones and new talents of which we don't even know what they are yet. Most of the specifics about the tree we don't know yet. And they're not just copy and pasting the stuff that was on the old tree. There will be some of that, I'm sure, but probably going to be a lot of new talents, a lot of new nodes as well. Combine that with the blessing rebalances we know are on the way, and presumably weapon rebalancing and overhauls on top of that, which, while not going to completely replace new weapons like the Melt-A-Gun and other things that we want to see, will certainly help a lot if they're taking the time to take a crappy weapon and make it usable or fun again. Yeah, this is a lot of good stuff. It's been a long time coming. The wait was not pleasant, but I think it's clear at this point the teams have not been idle either. And as I said, I think there is a lot to be excited for here. Not just because of what will be there on October 4th, but the opportunity to expand on this framework in the future, which allows for just so much more customization than the 18 talents we currently have on live. Future classes will likely expand on these same skill trees, but they could add their own separate zones and nodes, which then have more options and way more crossover potential and pass the build down. And with console out now, or coming out on October 4th, support will pick up again, if Vermintide is any indication. Content will become more frequent, which means more balancing, more patches, maps, and weapons moving forward. So I am cautiously optimistic. This is going to be a fantastic step for Darktide and will get people playing again because it's sorely needed. So let me know what you guys think of what we've seen so far, and let me know what you're going to be trying out on day 1 of the Darktide update, and hopefully we'll be able to get some content out with it real soon. See you all in the next one. Peace out.